Hi, Hayley.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for doing this. So lovely to get to talk to you.
Oh man, yes. I love talking to anyone at this point in the game. I'm like, dude, I've been sitting in my house watching The Crown just constant. I mean, I've been binge watching shows and hanging out with my dog. So I'm very excited to do this.
This is our first season of the series, so it's really exciting to have your perspective. And our goal is to inspire and equip people to get started in the music industry. And one of the big goals for that was to talk about music and the industry in a really real, human kind of way.
I love that.
And cover what we call music and mindset. So the mindset part is just intended to explore the mental health challenges that the industry can create, and also just give people tools to build a strong and healthy mental muscle to actually support the creative journey.
Yes, it might be the most important part.
Yeah, absolutely. And thankfully, conversations around mental health are becoming more commonplace. Do you feel like those conversations are important? And like, if so, what are your thoughts on how to talk about these things in like a mindful, graceful way? Because they're kind of hard to talk about sometimes.
Yeah, they are. I think that these conversations in a genuine context, in an empathetic environment, are really important. It's really easy for these conversations to get spliced up and cut into sound bites and then clickbait, and it becomes almost part of the marketing package. But I think that underneath all of that, hopefully the intent of all these conversations is always just to arm people with knowledge and let people know they're not alone.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if you feel this way at all, but I think we as artists are built to feel things more intensely, like if it's joy, we're on cloud nine. If it's pain, it's like a semi truck. And I feel like we're feeling things so deeply that, hopefully it's compelling to translate those things into music. But that's a huge superpower that you have, I feel like, is to take these really intense emotions and translate them into something that other people can connect to.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, when Chester from Linkin Park passed away, I remember, at that point, a lot of artists that I'd grown up knowing about or having played shows with or listening to, it had happened a few times over. And I think Chester's death hit me really hard because we were putting out After Laughter, which was an album in which I was grappling with the thought of, I had not been diagnosed yet with depression, but I was grappling with that. And I realized, like, to be an artist or to be someone who expresses emotion in any medium for a living, if you zoom out, I think that artists' job is to be able to detect pain and to really get into it, really get in the weeds. And we're supposed to. It's like we have X-ray eyes for that. And the duty then is to take that and spin it until it becomes something that is useful and beautiful. I always think about that as my role on Earth. I might get stuck down there in the weeds for a time.
Sure.
The challenge is to climb out of it with some sort of a treasure that you've uncovered while you were down there.
Yeah. Do you feel a sort of pressure to channel those feelings when they're most raw, or kind of fear losing touch of it?
I always need hindsight, and I resent that a little bit. In fact, I like so much hindsight that I end up romanticizing the pain. And that's something that I am currently working through and trying to understand better, because I want to be able to express pain or locate certain types of trauma in my bones, in my fascia, in my, all throughout my body. I want to be able to sense it at least closer to real time, because I feel that healing might be easier that way, or just getting through one of those surges of hardship would be easier if I could not delay the acceptance of it or the acknowledgement of it. As we've grown up making records, I've noticed that when I'm writing about things in real time, I always think it sucks. Like most of After Laughter, I was writing in real time, completely oblivious to the fact that I was suffering depression and PTSD. That seemed like something that happened to other people. And so it was weird because I was writing about everything I was feeling, but I hated everything I was writing because it felt almost elementary. I think I try to outsmart my own mind. Sometimes that's probably a good thing. It's like a protective mechanism. But in other ways, man, it's like, if I could just go through this now, maybe I won't have to carry it for the next few years.
Sure. It's kind of like moving in waves of input and output.
Yeah, totally. And I'm always really proud of the output. And when it's in hindsight, I feel like I've gotten the best of it by that point. And when I'm dealing in the now and the present, it's getting the best of me is my perception of it. And so how could anything I have to say about something that's getting the best of me be useful or be helpful? I haven't listened to Petals for Armor or my other solo album, Flowers for Faces, Descansos. I've hardly listened to those at all since they dropped. And just today, I was in the car and one of the songs came on shuffle. So then I put the record on and I didn't listen to it because there was a lot of really tough stuff to listen to. And now being removed from it a little bit more, I feel I can sense the growth in me and, you know, just have a clear perspective on it.
Absolutely. So when you're thinking about, we call it music and mindset, but it's really just about like, how does your emotional state impact the music that you make? How are you able to actually end up eventually channeling it into your writing process?
Mostly what feels like by accident. I mean, man, it's such an alchemy of moments and of lessons, and it feels a bit surreal, I think, to be hit with something that you don't really know where it came from, you know?
Sure.
I find that, like, if I'm trying really hard to work through a problem as if it's a math problem, I'm never going to come up with the answer that I want to find, you know? And a lot of times I can't actively seek out an answer or the perfect line. Our A&R guy that's worked with us since we were like really young teenagers, he was in with us the other day while we were listening back to some demos, and he was like, you know, you said something once to me when you were like 17 or 18. We must have been writing Riot, our sophomore record. And he was like, I gave you a compliment. And you're like, yeah, I'm really glad that happened. And he was like, I always tell new artists that you said that because it feels like it's not that you weren't taking any responsibility for it or taking pride in it, but it's like you sense that there was nothing you could have done to force it to be. It had to happen to you. And I still feel like that. It's very much magic to make really transformative art that transforms a part of you. It's like you can't make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really interesting way to think about it. I've heard some people say that a lot of experiences are redeemable through art. And I just love that word because it's kind of like, it's not that you want hard things to happen to people to create art. It just so happens that hard things do happen. And then how it's redeemed tends to be through some really great, powerful art that ends up helping other people redeem something powerful.
Yeah, it's so true. It creates opportunity for corrective experience when you're able to sit and write through your feelings. More for me, I think, because I'm such a visual person, seeing it on paper, or even if it's on a screen in front of me as I'm typing away, it's like seeing it there versus it being this nebulous thing in my mind that's swirling is really helpful because it becomes concrete. And I think the next step for me of catharsis is giving it away. And I did get to experience that part with Petals and Descansos, but I did not get to experience the exchange of performing those songs and literally breathing them out and having other people breathe out their experience of those songs. And that become the new collective experience of those songs.
Yeah. And I think a thesis that comes through that I noticed in your songs is being content with loneliness. Is that a theme that's come up for you throughout your career and especially on the road?
Yeah, which is interesting because I am most often never alone. I'm constantly surrounded by people. I mean, I think the biggest gift about joining a band as a young teenager, for me, it was that I grew up in a broken home. My parents were divorced. I went through 2 other divorces with my parents' second marriages. And I was, at that point, physically alone a lot of the time. Single mother, raised me and had to work multiple jobs and all that stuff. So there was a deep longing and loneliness that I think was thematic for me. And then joining the band put some healing balm on those wounds, you know?
Yeah.
And touring in a bus feels like you're in Neverland and you're surrounded by lost boys. I've really not been alone all that often, but the feeling is there.
Right.
I think the feeling was set into place early on in my life of like, okay, you're on your own. You're an only child in this marriage, and now they're divorced, and now you've got to make sense of this by yourself. And that was just a narrative that was deeply ingrained into me from a young age. So yeah, I do think it's a theme. It's a thread throughout many of our works over the years.
Yeah. The harder question is like, how do you cope with those feelings of loneliness, especially during a time like COVID?
It was really tough, man. And I also, like everybody, we had this experience that we were all going through together, this tragedy of a pandemic and a world that was certainly not ready for anything like that. But I also had real life, everyday, personal things going on too, like stuff with my family, stuff with friends that I had to go through and be alone in for a lot of it. And it was really hard. I spent a lot of time trying to understand the concept of romance, not in the sense that romance should be what we see in a fairy tale. It was more like, what do I find romantic in the mundane, like in the everyday, ordinary bullshit that we tend to complain about when we are taking ordinary life for granted. I did a FaceTime interview with Elton John, and I still cannot believe that happened. But when we were talking, I had really been in the midst of that lesson for myself, and I was waking up in the morning and I was having tea ceremonies for one, just me. And it was a traditional tea ceremony that I had learned about, a Moroccan tea ceremony. So I was trying to use that as a meditation. I was putting on music that really calmed me and made me feel like what people would say now, like the main character. Like I was main charactering myself daily to try and
That's awesome.
Evoke this sense of, of romance in my everyday life, cleaning and doing the laundry. And how do I make this feel like really beautiful? Because this is my home. This is place that I dreamt about when I was not in a good place and coming out of a marriage that was not healthy. I dreamt about making a home for myself that was beautiful and lovely, and only what I allowed in would get in, right? I think that was the best part about the alone time for me, was that lesson of romance can be multiple things and it can be just for you.
Yeah, the idea of finding romance in the mundane is really beautiful. And I'd read that you said you feel a sense of emptiness when not turning music on. How does music kind of fill up that space and help you romanticize the mundane?
I'm a 4 on the Enneagram, and I don't know if you know much about the Enneagram, but it's a really fun tool for personality. And I think a 4 on the Enneagram is constantly looking for romance and is constantly looking for the feeling of specialness, like creating special moments. I think that the music adds to that specialness of the moment and having it feel like a soundtrack, having it feel like you can control it too. I mean, I would put on Jessica Pratt, Quiet Signs, and just sit and drink tea and listen to that. Or I would make my own music. And, I wasn't expecting to write Descansos, the second. I never thought I would do a solo album to begin with, much less 2 solo albums in a year. But the second one came about by this practice of romancing my own stuff, finding those things that felt special. I would sit on the back porch or the front porch, watch the neighbors walk by, and just sing to myself, very much like Moon River, Audrey Hepburn vibes, hanging out the window. I just kind of thought, well, I mean, I haven't gotten to sit around and play guitar like this since I was 15 or 16. So that feels healing to my soul right now. And if it wasn't me playing, then it was putting on records that gave me that sense as well.
Yeah. I think a lot of people can probably relate to that too. I know I can, just in the sense of you might not even recognize some of your own feelings. I think for me personally, it's like I might not even know that I'm sad until all of a sudden I choose to listen to something that's, pretty sad. And then it helps you like feel and accept those feelings and kind of go through life that way. And I think even just like listening all the way back to like The Only Exception, I always felt so emotionally connected to that. And I can see your personal view of love kind of coming through that one. Do you feel like it describes the way that you approach love in any way, even now?
Maybe not as much now, but I was 19 when I wrote that. And I was entering into a relationship that I think, if I'm really honest, I knew was not a great one for me, but it was so different from the relationships that I had experienced or witnessed in my parents.
Sure. Right.
Like we're all doing at 18, 19, 20 years old. We're really adamantly forging our own paths and breaking out of this cocoon that we've been safe inside of. I do think that there are certain aspects of that song and that lyric in particular about, like, I thought I'll just be content with loneliness. I do think that there are days that I find some solace in that. Whenever we used to travel and when we were making Petals for Armor in LA, I would pass by these old apartment buildings in California. There's just like tons of them. And so many of them on the east side had these cute little balconies. You could tell they were really small apartments and little string lights on the porch. And I would fantasize like I could be happy just by myself in one of those places with the dog and not many sets of silverware, not many plates and cups, just enough for me. I think there is something romantic about that.
Sure.
But I also really love companionship and I love family so much. I think that it's okay for me to keep a part of that fantasy, that idea of a romantic, maybe somewhat nomadic life in me. And maybe that's the part of me that's very artistic and kind of eccentric. But I have to bring myself back to the other side that balances me out, that knows that for me, I very much was made for companionship and many types of it, not just romantic companionship, but like, I don't know, loneliness and sadness and sitting around smoking a cigarette and having a glass of whiskey and lamenting your bad life choices. There's always those characters in movies that I think we can all relate to. But it's not where I want to be stuck.
Yeah. And it's always like that sense of, I think, balance. Of course, like listen to that character and be able to feel that character, but also be able to connect with others at the same time.
I've been watching The Crown, so I'm addicted to it. There were scenes where Princess Margaret, she just can't get a break. She's so unlucky in love. And, she's like in her beautifully decked out apartment and she puts on like some old beautiful song and she's just smoking and she's drinking and smashing things. And I was like, oh, I know that night. I know that feeling. And it's actually, I can romanticize that when I admitted to myself, that's cool. And it seems fun to be reckless and like it's mysterious and broody and like, go be in a rock band and like be a mess.
Sure.
But I think it takes a lot of courage to choose a path to health and mental health in particular, because it's a lot of work. And to be honest, like people don't seem as interested in health and happiness as they do in people's breakdowns. And I get that. I'm guilty of that too. But I'm fighting for the side of me that really wants to understand contentment more and joy and just health in general.
Yeah. I mean, what pulls you back into a better state? Have you had transformative experiences with therapy or meditation or anything like that?
Yeah, I still go to therapy once a week. At one point during the height of the pandemic, I was doing twice a week on the computer. Some days you go in not thinking that anything's wrong. And by the end of it, you're like, oh, we just worked through something, something I did not think was going to come up at all. EMDR, that has really been helpful for me. I've been able to notice a difference, never immediately. It's never like a direct, like I leave the office and then I'm great. It's more like 2 months later, something will happen and I'll be like, oh, whoa, I did not have a trauma response to that. That felt like a 1 where it used to feel like a 10,
Yeah.
So I think that modality in particular has been helpful for me and transformative. Also, just how humbling it is to admit how bad off you might feel or how not well you're doing. Especially, I think people that do music that have any degree of success, I think that it actually gets harder to ask for help because it's embarrassing, because people think they've got to they know they're making money, they live in a home, like they probably have everything they ever dreamed of. And you know, I like 15, 16 years of being in a band that makes a living being a band. And I can tell you with full confidence, it's not happiness. It's definitely fulfillment in the sense you don't like walk into a club of like elite music success stories and they hand you a bag of all the tools that you're going to need to get through this. Like they kind of, if anything, they hand you like a blindfold and like some earmuffs.
They go north and you're like, okay.
Right. I say this to most of my friends that get into entertainment, or friends that don't even do music, but do things that are grueling and maybe they're freelance. Like saying no is just as lucrative as saying yes. Sometimes, you know, I mean, it's up to you to discern which is which, but I think saying no has also been a transformative experience for me.
Sure. You were saying they don't hand you a bag of tools at the door. What kind of tools would you have hoped that they would have given to you?
I would say it's something that one person can't give you. I think community is the most important for me. And that also takes courage, because you have to be willing to go meet people and to trust in people. And I think that the muscle of discernment has to be strengthened, because you can't be right every time. There's been plenty of times I've thought, oh, I'm going to like make friends here and I'm going to learn from them and we're going to be able to support each other and we do something similar. So this will be a good comrade for me, you know?
Sure.
And expectations hardly ever equal reality. And you can't expect someone to live up to what you've created in your mind for a partnership or a friendship to be. It's just like anything. Like when you go to school, you're not automatically friends with everyone. It takes time and trust building and like experiences to bond and to form a real relationship with people. And the people that I have done that with and who've made that same effort with me, I wouldn't be able to get through music business without them. I mean, obviously my bandmates are one, but even people like Beth from Best Coast, like her and I are always going through the same thing at the same time, no matter how far away we are from each other. And that's just been super helpful for me. But yeah, community is number one for me. And then on top of that, it's just like, again, it comes down to humility. It's like being okay with being wrong and being okay with having to start over or do something that you're not immediately good at.
Yeah.
That's a tool I wish I had had way sooner in my life, because I get super discouraged when I'm not great at something right away. And, you know, being in the music industry, it's like you're not, it's sad, but only a smaller fraction of the job is playing music. They don't tell you that when you get into it.
They should tell you that. The onboarding packet.
Very, very bold letters. That should be. I mean, again, back to being able to say no. We've gotten better at it as we've gotten older, but there's just been a lot of things that are really shiny and come with a big, big paycheck that I've had to look our manager in the eye and be like, this is not worth it, man.
Sure.
Like, this is tempting because this could, if I could buy my whole family houses, you know, with this, but I can't go against my own integrity, my character. I can't go against something that I believe in to go be a part of something that's just going to be a flash in the pan and give me a little bit of fame and give me a little bit of a boost in my earnings. Like I just...
Sure. Yeah. I feel like that's such a important skill too, for like anyone who's really just starting out, like trying to hone that muscle of saying no and honing what you want and are willing to do and what you don't want and are not willing to do before they become those big checks, those really big decisions. Cause then I'm sure like it's amazing that you can look something like that in the eye and have developed that muscle to be able to say, wow, it's really tempting, but I hear what my heart wants and I can make a decision that way.
Yeah. And you know, we decided in 2018, actually at the top of 2018, that at the end of the year, we were going to take a significant break. Paramore's been on the road since, I mean, Zach was 14 on our first tour and he's 30 now. And we did everything we wanted to. We were excited and super wide-eyed. And as we gotten older, we can look back and be like, we probably didn't need to do that. Or, oh, this was a little cheesy. I wish we hadn't done that. And, we've made new decisions based on those learning experiences. But by the end of 2018, we were like, okay, this is it for a while. We really are going to take time off for us, not because someone's leaving the band or some other bullshit Paramore soap opera, but just because we want to, we need it. We need to know what real life looks like before we completely miss the boat. And I've taken many social media breaks. Taylor's completely off social media. Zach has decided to do his side project a little bit more often and work with other artists, kind of get a break from just Paramore world. And we were somewhere with our manager recently, and he was like, man, more people are listening to your band today than when you were on tour.
Wow.
For some reason, the time off, not only has it been great for our minds and our hearts and even just our passion for playing music, but it's actually been such a great thing for our career. People are either nostalgic for Paramore of old, or they're really pumped about where we're going next. And obviously you can't predict that, but I think it just goes to show that sometimes your no can be a good business decision as well as a good personal decision.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, one phrase that I hear a lot in the industry and it's kind of thrown out a lot is burnout.
Yes.
To you, what does burnout mean?
Oh man, it's meant so many things over the years. We didn't have a word for it the first time it happened to us because, people didn't talk about all this stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
2008, we pulled off of a tour. There was band drama. It was just such a big deal, especially I think because I'm a female. I got the brunt of it, and it was really oh, Hayley's a bit. The band's going to break up. And the truth is we were burnt out. Zach and Josh isn't in the band anymore, but at the time their parents had just divorced and they really didn't want to be on the road. And we were all fighting about it because the band was doing really well at the time. And we were just spent. We weren't equipped to deal with the success that was thrown at us. We were really young. We missed our homes. We felt obligated to this job. And that was, I think, lesson one with it. And it was really hard to come off that tour, but it was really good for us. And then I would say the end of the self-titled album cycle, there was a tour we did. It was one of the last tours. And I just remember Taylor and I crying in the back lounge being like, we're so exhausted. And we were on a Grammy campaign trail. The album had been #1. And so singles were coming out and, we were doing the thing. And it was so incredible what was happening for us as musicians and as a band. But personally, again, we were just kind of falling apart inside. And that was lesson 2. And after that, we lost another band member. And I just remember being on the phone with Taylor, watching the VMAs, watching people that we had been in their shoes only a year prior. And I just remember talking to Taylor and being like, I don't care about this. Can we just not prioritize that we have to be at every award show and we have to be the show ponies? Can we just play music and enjoy it for us? And we made a pact that we would look out for each other. And if someone was kind of slipping and their mental health wasn't in a great place, that we would speak up for the other person and say, we need to go home or we need time off. And sure enough, 2018, we got to a point where we were doing good and we knew we were doing good, but we also knew that that was a fragile state to be, that doesn't last. Sure. And so we tried to get ahead of it. And I think that was probably the smartest decision we've ever made in our career.
Yeah. And that takes so much. You have so much riding on it. It can be really hard to take that first step. I mean, were you aware you were headed towards a burnout feeling, waiting for some kind of rest period, or did it really hit an aha moment all at once?
Well, I think we had had enough experience with that feeling being at its most intense that even just any subtle signs of it, we kind of recognized. And it was a big foreshadowing. We were really predicting, okay, we probably have another year in us, but what if we just finish out this year?
Right.
And just call it. There's no shame in stopping a little bit ahead of time. We may piss off a few fans, but ultimately we trust the relationship we have with the people that support our band. And if we're just transparent about it, that's also been a big deal for us too, in this like,
Right.
I always think of it as like the second life of Paramore, because when Zach came back to the band, it was kind of like we were adults enough to really understand who we want to be and who we are.
Sure.
And
Right.
how we want this to go. If we're transparent about how we want this to be, who's going to be bummed at that?
Yeah.
You know?
And I think that as a part of a group and with having so many voices invested in your career, how were you still able to develop that muscle to tune into specifically what you wanted, what Hayley needed?
Some of that came from being nudged by Taylor. I think he exhibited more of his anxieties on the outside. Like you could tell that he struggled. For me, I kept everything close to the chest, you know? And so you had to be really, really close to me to be able to see it. And I really loved that I could be honest about my divorce during the After Laughter album cycle. I really loved that I had nothing to hide, because that helped me come out of my shell a little bit and realize that, oh, like people are people and they're going to be empathetic and they're going to get that I am a person going through something that a lot of people unfortunately go through. And I think coming off the road and having some encouragement from my bandmates and you know, my family too, but having Taylor really remind me like, you need to take care of that. Like, I know what's going on and you got to like push yourself to get help. And that's kind of when I started really going to therapy. I started therapy really for the first time when we came off of the After Laughter album cycle. And from that point, it gets easier to admit that, like, I have no shame telling people that currently I take medication for depression, and I hope I don't always have to do that. But if I didn't start doing that, who knows what would have happened? I was kind of tanking because, like I said, I kept everything close to the chest and it kind of just lived in me. It didn't ever have an outlet.
And that's another reason, like you said, that's where community comes into play. And even if that's a therapist, I mean, was writing music and creating art encouraged by your therapist and your friends?
Yeah, mainly my therapist, because as far as my friends were concerned, we were just coming off of 2 years on the road and having made another record. And it was kind of like, oh, you want time off, so you're not going to be making music, right? And I didn't think that I would. But when I started doing therapy more regularly, my therapist was like, you need to also, I had just been diagnosed with PTSD and was trying to understand that, because I was like, well, wait a minute, I haven't like been to war. I was very ignorant about all the varieties of trauma that there can be. And she was like, you need an outlet for some of that, because some of it is anger. Like some of it's like a deep-seated anger that you've turned inward on yourself, which, you know, is what depression is.
Right.
And that really hit me, because I never considered the fact that all emotions are connected. I started to write, and I think that's one of the first songs was Simmer. And I think that's why it was like, oh, I needed to admit that I had a lot of anger in me.
Yeah. And admitting that anger is an okay feeling when channeled the right way or channeled a healthy way.
Yeah.
I think is really hard for a lot of people. Like we see anger as this like big, explosive, fiery thing that can cause so much hurt, but also going through it in a healthy way. If that's music, if that's, you know, all these other ways to channel it, rewriting your relationship with anger, I think is something I've felt myself. And I think a lot of people feel.
That's cool. Yeah. I mean, without it, so many incredible social justice movements would never have begun.
Right.
So many changes in our society, in the world as we know it, would not be here if it weren't for some form, whether diluted or not, of rage. And, you know, there is such a thing as righteous rage. And I've been really grateful for uncovering that and trying to understand it more.
Do you feel like you're out of a burnout stage? And how did you get out of it, if so?
Yes and no, because I do think my tolerance for what I'm willing to undertake is lower. I'm very happy taking it easy, being easy on my body. Because that's another thing, we haven't really touched on this yet, but like trauma and emotional illnesses of any sort, they manifest physically, right? And so I've noticed since being home and kind of being a little bit dormant that I feel these pains or strains in my body that I used to not have time for. I used to not give time to. It's an interesting question because I'm still figuring out the answer to that. I don't feel burnt out, but I definitely feel that my tolerance is changing and what I'm willing to put my whole self into. I'm probably going to be a little bit more picky for a while until I rebuild that confidence with myself.
First of all, I'm so glad you had a moment to rest in some shape or form and feel those things. But just the amount that you guys as a group and you personally have been able to tackle in a short amount of time. And also, it's just so potent. Sometimes it takes a band 30, 40, 50 years to have any real influence on artists that are coming up. And I think you guys have a really strong influence on artists who are just starting out now, maybe because you were able to communicate things in a specific way, go through things together as a band, and also are doing things like this and like actually talking through it, like sharing what that's been like for you. I think
that's cool.
Creates a profound sense of like connectedness to people that listen to your music.
Oh, thank you. That's very cool. I love that.
Of course. Well, how are you avoiding burnout now? And do you have some healthy habits that you're relying on for that?
So one of my favorite ways is to just take all social media off my phone periodically. I mean, lately I've been like, I feel like I've been glued to my phone the past 2 weeks, but I take significant breaks. That's been one of the bigger things because social media, when we entered into the music industry, it was not a part of the contract. It was not a part of the job description. It didn't exist in the same way.
That's crazy.
Oh my God, dude. That's how old I am too. But we didn't even fathom that we would be talking directly to the people that were buying our albums. Unplugging from that weirdly takes care of a wide range of issues for me with my job, which is my big worry about how I'm perceived. It's important for me to pull myself out of this ego fluffing factory where if I'm not on it, then all I need to focus on is the world right around me. My dog over here sitting in the floor, the candle that's burning, the dinner that I'm going to cook soon. Like it's that's my real existence, you know?
Yeah.
But it also keeps me from having to feel like I should be promoting something all the time when I don't need to. And I recognize I'm very fortunate. Like my band has gotten to a point where we're successful enough that I don't feel like I have to be selling something every 5 minutes. I feel that I have enough faith in the people who've supported us that whenever we put something out, they'll show up. Hopefully they'll like it and come to the show. But yeah, I think that's been the number one helper when it comes to burnout. But on top of that, routine, doing things that give me groundedness.
Right.
Seeing a friend once a week to have a drink or make a meal together, or like watching Ted Lasso every Friday. You know, going to the park with my dog, keeping up with chiropractic appointments for my stupid head bang neck that everyone told me when I was 15 I would regret, and I swore that they were wrong.
You're like, I'll deal with it later.
Yeah, please let me live. But I will say I'm a little nervous about, okay, what do all those things look like when we are back on the road? Like, will I be able to maintain routines that have been so helpful for me? You know, and that's just, honestly, that's just discipline. I can be on a bus and still make my tea in the morning and meditate. And I can go for a walk or ride my bike. I can bring Alf and take him to a park. It's funny, like it takes a lot of discipline to finish a song and make an album. But I would say that most the artists that I'm friends with, discipline is not our forte. It's not our strong suit. There's a certain type of discipline that you've got it down because it takes a ton of work to make art that you're proud of. But when it comes to real life, I'm like, nobody taught me this stuff. I guess I got to like just throw myself in the deep end.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at as a 32-year-old.
Do you have any advice for the young women who are performing, who are in the public eye as an artist right now?
Yes. I would say number one, it's the best time because there's so many young women, teenage girls, and so many older female artists that have open arms waiting to welcome in all this new talent and this new blood. I don't want to speak ignorantly about it, but it feels like a safer time to come into this world, but it's not without its flaws. And I think as long as you're flexing that muscle that we were talking about, that muscle of discernment, that voice deep in your gut that says, this isn't me, or this is me, and I'm going to fight for this. That's the thing to listen to. It will always be there. It'll be your constant companion, no matter if you're signing your first record deal or you're negotiating your master's when you're 40 years old. It'll always be there. And so the earlier you start to listen to it, I think the more you can recognize that as your truth. And I think that's the biggest thing. And then beyond that, just find your people, because your discernment will help you with that too. Find your people and you'll have a support system.
Yeah. And I think now more than ever too, like we were saying, people are openly talking about the benefits of mindfulness and bettering your mental health, or not even just bettering, but listening to and paying attention to.
Yes.
There's meditation apps, books on mental health, there's therapy.
Yeah.
Are there any other go-to tools that you'd want to recommend to people to check out?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this book, Your Body Keeps the Score, about the connection between your mind and your body and how emotional trauma and just mental health in general, it's physiological. Everything's interconnected. And I think also a little bonus, if you're kind of like a nerd like me, I get really into the science of it. There's plenty of other books and podcasts to listen to that maybe don't get into the nitty-gritty of the actual science behind what's happening in your body and in your mind. But I think it's great to be equipped with that. There's also Women Who Run with the Wolves is it's folk tales and fables passed down by women, ancient stories that still resonate today. That's a great book. There's a podcast that I've been listening to also recently. I just sent it to my baby sister. It's called Help Me Be Me. And it's really easy listening. You don't need to know a lot about mental health, or you don't need to have ever gone to a therapist to understand, because I think she puts it into very conversational terms. Like, it feels in some ways elementary, but it's also deep enough that you can really gain some insight from it. So yeah, I mean, there's just so many things at our fingertips now to be able to get into, that to keep with us all the time. And then, and if all else fails, you can just do like a breathing exercise on one of those apps. And that's helpful.
Yeah. Your mom, Christy, also teaches emotional intelligence in the music business, right?
She does at Belmont. It's like
amazing.
Crazy. It's one of the most popular classes there. People will come up to me in Nashville, and in my mind, I guess because I'm a big egotistical bitch, I'm like, oh, they like Paramore, and they'll be like, oh, we know your mom, and I'm like, oh, I feel like such an idiot, but yeah,
I met her last week. She's awesome.
Oh, you did?
yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. She's so good at it.
Has that understanding of emotional intelligence given you any added strength for longevity in music?
Yeah. And also just it's my mom, and she tells me all the time, like, I can't do some of these exercises on you because you know me too well and I know you too well. Right. But even still, like, the conversations that we're able to have about my job and about the pressures that I feel sometimes, or maybe the anxiety about certain decisions that I need to make, it's great because she's working about it. So it's been cool for our relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, do you think it's possible to avoid burnout, or do you feel like a sense of burnout is in some ways inevitable for us as artists?
I do. I don't want to be like so positive that I become ignorant. I do think that burnout is somewhat inevitable. I think that, like when you really love doing a job and you're working throughout the day and you like forget to eat lunch because you're like firing away. I think it's kind of like that. There are just times where, not necessarily even for a negative reason, that you'll overwork yourself and you won't know. Or there's just times that you think you're making the right decision. Maybe you don't know what all that decision entails. But I do think that you can take all those lessons in stride and they stack up and build your foundation.
Yeah.
And my mom says this thing a lot, reset, restart, where 1,000,000 times a day, if you need to, you can take a break, take a breath and just say, all right, I'm resetting and I'm restarting. Like I'm starting over fresh.
I love that.
Yeah, I love that too. She said that to me recently and I was like, why have you never told me that? That's so simple and helpful. But yeah, I mean, I think it's life. Certain things that might not make me anxious today, tomorrow I might wake up and have to deal with, and I might rip all my hair out. So it's always there. Like the possibility of just being stressed and tired or fed up with something. It's like, you can't avoid life, right? But I think that with enough discipline, community support, and a centeredness that like connects you to who you most want to be, that's what you can keep intact in order to make those decisions the best that you can.
So in the next 10 years, what's on the horizon in music and personally?
Well, who knows personally? I think I can predict Paramore a little bit better. We're making a record. It's very, it's very exciting because we still don't exactly know what it is. And I think that's a scary time and also the most exciting time because there's absolutely no margins on the page. It's just like everything and anything that we take in and that we output is grist for the mill. So it's like, I mean, I would imagine we'll just keep making stuff. We'll keep making stuff in our own different ways. I mean, now we know that not only do we love doing Paramore, but Zach has Half Noise and he loves doing that. And I've enjoyed writing with other band members like Joey, who plays bass for us on tour. And I don't know, it feels very healthy. And like we have such a cool commune of bands that we live in community with here in Nashville. And it makes me feel like there's not really any end in sight.
Yeah. I mean, what a journey you guys have been on together.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you might want to add?
I think just want to say thank you to people that have been listening to our records. I mean, we've taken a long break and hopefully it won't be too long before we're putting some music out into the world again. But like, I'm just so grateful people still care. It means the world. This is so special to us to be in Paramore. So just want to say thanks.
Amazing. Well, I definitely want to say a big thank you to you for doing this. This was awesome. Really appreciate it all.
And it was.
Yeah. So much good stuff. I can't wait to listen back to it all.
Well, thank you. I appreciate all your questions. That was great.